in relation to the CO2 law and the COP26, in which WWF was represented by Patrick Hofstetter, who is climate expert in WWF Switzerland. Now my presentation is kind of stuck. Now, there you go. Thank you, Patrick, for your presentation tonight, for taking the time to discuss with us your experiences in the COP26. We're very much looking forward to it, and I will let you know a little bit who is with us tonight. So Patrick Hofstetter has a master in mechanical engineering and a PhD in environmental sciences, both from ETH Zurich. Until 2010, he ran his own consultancy in industrial ecology. From 1999 to 2002, he had a research fellowship at the US Environmental Protection Agency and was teaching industrial ecology at Harvard School of Public Health. Since 2002, he has a part-time employment with WWF Switzerland in the field of advocacy work in energy and climate issues. Since 2003, he joined many times the Swiss negotiation delegation at the UNFCCC climate negotiations as the NGO representative. So he has plenty of experience with these negotiations. He's board member of several NGO coalitions and governmental steering boards indirectly involved, and is directly involved in several public referendums. Where all the others? Okay. I think I just erased by mistake a couple of slides. Apologies for that. But before getting started, I'll just let you know a little bit the ground rules. So basically, there will be a couple of opportunities to ask Patrick a question. He will indicate the time, and please write them in the chat. At all times, make sure that your microphone is muted, except if you want to ask a question personally, and then wait for the right time. Also, we are recording this. We're recording this presentation, so if you don't want to be in the video, I recommend you to just not put your photo, and also if you want to change your name for security reasons. This video is going to be published in our YouTube channel, and you'll also be able to come back to it if you want to do so. And we're also encouraging you to share it with friends as soon as we have uploaded it. Anna, I hope you are already now pressing for the recording button. And if you have any challenges with technology, or if you're not hearing or not seeing or whatever happens, please write it in the chat, and Jack will let us know so that we can solve the situation whenever it arises. So Patrick, I welcome you to present your to share with us your presentation. I'm stop sharing now, and you can go ahead.
Thank you, Adriana. Also, thank you for the invitation and a nice introduction. And now I'll check with you whether you can see that already.
Yes,
in the right
that is
format.
perfect.
That's perfect. That's great.
Thank you.
And thanks for the interest of all of you joining tonight. Jack kind of warned me that the level of pre-knowledge is quite diverse. So some are very experienced, others not. So I try to make sure that there is something in it for everybody. If you feel lost, don't worry, there will be other topics where you will get in again, but I wanted to make it interesting for all different levels of colleagues joining right now. I will have three parts. One is kind of the CO2 law and where we got from there through October. Then I will have a little bit longer presentation on the COP26, the climate conference, since I heard that some of you are interested in that one. And then in the last part, I will go into the actual domestic policy agenda, what is happening right now and what will be happening in the coming few years. So you get an overview and an idea on that one as well. And so there are, after each major block, I will stop and we will take questions from the chat or maybe even live ones. I don't know exactly, so Jack will manage that one. Yeah, so you may remember in June 13th, we lost the public vote on the CO2 law. The CO2 law should have implemented our Paris commitment, the Swiss Paris commitment. And we lost it, of course, by a very small margin. Reasons are multiple. So we have at least 10 explanations where we lost the 2% that we missed out. So it's not that easy, and of course, if the vote would have happened at a different weekend, we certainly would have won it. But we didn't, so we have to stick with the realities, and the realities are kind of really frightening. Some of you are aware that the first volume of the new IPCC assessment has been published already. 2 more volumes will follow next year. And the science is kind of boring for me, having followed all these many years the science. I mean, it's more or less saying always the same since 1990 when the first volume appeared. Then the standing, of course, became better. We have a higher probability that all the predictions they make might come true, but the major thing actually that changed in the last 30 years is that the emissions grew dramatically. So what in the first assessment report looked like a mission achievable becomes more and more a mission unachievable, and that's of course worrying. This slide shows on the top, very importantly, kind of many of the impacts of climate change that we expect, and you can see some bars start really on the left side in the light yellow one. That's a warming of 1 degree and less, so what we already have, and this is also the reason why we see all these impacts already happening today. And actually the picture is from 2008, so when we didn't yet surpass this 1 degree threshold. And then you see the more we go to the right, the more severe these impacts get on water, ecosystems, food, and health. And because of this understanding what will happen at which temperature, which will always be incomplete, of course, but looks already more than 10 years ago very complete. The science tells us in the IPCC report from 2018 that actually achieving the 1.5 degree warming on a global average level would be a wise thing to do. And if you look in this diagram, you can easily see that this translates into a CO2 concentration of 300 ppm, parts per million. And now we are already way higher than that. We are at over 400 ppm, and it's increasing each year by about 3 ppm rather than decreasing. So we have already surpassed kind of the safe space. the good message is, of course, that the 350 ppm, that's a long-term thing that we need to achieve. So if we overshoot now, we still have some years time to get back to 350 before we would overpass 1.5 degree. But what I want to show with that is there's no real CO2 budget left that we should plan to emit and should start to divide among countries or among people. We are really in trouble. So the climate crisis is here and now. And this, of course, holds true also if experts look to the commitments and of Switzerland, and the overall judgment of the climate action tracker shows that the assessment for Switzerland shows that what we plan to do is insufficient, and that especially frightening on the left side, the blue line, this is what is most likely going to happen if we do not change dramatically our climate policy. And you see the green line, that would be needed at least to get into a more safe space in a 1.5 degree world. So you can see Switzerland is by far not doing enough to contribute its share. And if you look into its fair share, that considers also the high GDP per capita and so on, then you see that we are even in the red zone, the highly insufficient zone. So Switzerland does have, the world has a problem we have seen, and Switzerland has a problem that it doesn't contribute enough to avoid this climate crisis. So what do we do in such a situation? The public vote on the CO2 law has shown that many cities had a very clear yes to this CO2 law. So they want to have stricter rules on how we deal with fossil fuels mostly. And so we thought after this vote in June that it might be a good idea to start to work together with those cities. And on a network level, we already have this program, One Planet City Challenge, for 10 years now. So far, no Swiss city participated. So we started immediately to invite many Swiss cities that had high yes percentages. And we were very glad, actually, that finally 7 managed to sign on, the big ones like Zurich, Basel, Bern, and Lausanne, but also smaller ones like St. Gall, Thun, and Delémont. So we have now 7 Swiss cities in this global challenge. There will be around 300 cities competing worldwide, which one has the best climate plans and implementation. And next year in spring, there will be then the nominations of the winners, and we hope that in this way we also can have a good exchange of experiences of cities on how to go ahead anyway, even if there is no good national legislation. The same we did, or we are doing for companies. We are not yet there, but there is the Science-Based Targets initiative that helps companies to set themselves climate targets that are compatible with a 1.5 degree warming scenario. There have been already quite a number of Swiss companies doing that, about 30 countries, and half of them have already agreed targets. But we thought it might be a good thing to have many more Swiss companies joining that initiative. And in the background, we are now working with many business associations and other circles to come up with a campaign to increase this number of companies that go for science-based targets. That's an initiative that was co-founded by WWF with WRI, CDP, and Global Compact. And if you are working in a company that has like more than 200 employees or so, then please ask your bosses, if you're not the boss yourself, whether you couldn't think about joining this initiative. I think that's a very good opportunity, especially in times when the legal environment is not yet as evolved as it should be. We have also developments, of course, outside of Switzerland. The EU is preparing a whole package of new legislation that should help them to achieve a minus 55% reduction by 2030 compared to 1990. That's a quite ambitious target they have set and agreed, and now they need to see how to achieve that. They will kind of revise 12 legislations, and they are more or less summarized here. The Fit for 55 package, 55 refers to this reduction target, includes, of course, instruments that go for pricing, then standards, targets, rules, and have also very interesting support measures in place, also a social climate fund to make sure that it is not going against the poor. And there's no time, of course, to introduce all that, but some of this legislation we already have in Switzerland as well, where we follow the EU. So hopefully, if they increased ambition in this legislation, Switzerland will take them over one-to-one, and this would be already very helpful. And of course, we are looking also into other legislation in the EU that we might take over in the future to get here a more aligned policy within Europe. Yeah, that was already the first block, actually, and I'm ready to take first questions on that kind of environment after the last vote from June 13th.
So nobody's typed one in yet, but I will start. I assume the One City Challenge, the plans are on their website for the different cities?
This is a cooperation with Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP. And what the cities do or have to do in order to be able to participate, they have to fill in a whole set of data and answer lots of questions on CDP. And those data are transparent, so you can see the data for those 300 cities. And that's also the database that is used now for the assessment to elect the winners. There will be 2 winners per country, and then there will be a national winner. I think last time Mexico City won, another time Paris, and in the beginning of the contest, I think many Swedish cities won because it was also started by WWF Sweden, and they also host this program. Does this answer your question?
I think so. Yep. There is another one. If I can read this from Cara, you mentioned efforts to get cities to compete to meet emissions goals. Are Switzerland's emissions concentrated in the cities?
Actually, Switzerland's emissions are probably most concentrated in aviation when they fly out of Switzerland, to be honest about that. But yes, actually, I mean, this urbanization trend that we see globally, that's more or less the same in Switzerland. I have not the exact percentage, but my best guess would be that like 50 or 60% of the emissions are either in cities or caused by people living in cities. So that's an important lever. But then, and this is probably even more interesting, because what we see in public votes is, of course, that we have a split between urban and rural voters. And many rural voters actually work in cities. So they just kind of commute, and to show them how a future living is well possible without burning fossil fuels, at the place where they work will, of course, help their understanding that this transformation is possible and has also its benefits, so not just its costs. So it's also kind of a strategy on how to eventually also reach the more rural areas.
I think that's it.
If I would like to also just make a question, Patrick, which sector in Switzerland is the one that has more emissions?
Yeah, if you include the aviation, as I mentioned, together with the ground transport, this makes up together about 50% of all emissions. Mm-hmm. And then the buildings, and only then the industry. And this is very different, of course, from other countries where power sector and industry are the major emitters, and the other sectors are smaller. So we have a slightly different pattern.
Are the emissions from industry that are done kind of in a different country, are they also taken into consideration or not?
No, thanks for pointing that out. Very importantly, since Switzerland only committed, or each country just commits targets for its domestic emissions. This means that we don't look into imported emissions when it comes to this type of statistics. But Switzerland is a special case in that respect as well. As you all know, a very open economy with a lot of imports and exports. That means that our footprint of our consumption is much bigger than the domestic footprint. It's actually like 2.5 times larger than the domestic one. So most emissions that we cause are actually emitted elsewhere. So that's thanks for this question.
Thank you. And maybe we can go ahead. If there are any further questions?
Yeah, I think I will go ahead, and I mean at the end we will have plenty of opportunities to ask more questions, if that's okay. Yeah, the Glasgow Climate Conference, it's already the number 26. That's where the number comes from. Conference of Parties number 26 within the climate negotiations. And before the conference started, it was mentioned by many that this is a very important conference. And why is it so important? I mean, why the heck the Australian Prime Minister should have come to Glasgow as well? And the reason is quite simple, because it was the point in time for all countries to present upgraded climate commitments. That's called NDCs, nationally determined contributions, but it's basically the climate commitments they do, and they should have actually sent in already last year, but since the conference didn't take place, they postponed the deadline to this year. And the whole idea was also the idea of inviting 100 head of states was to put as much pressure as possible on all of them to actually send in new and updated climate targets. That's why it was very important, but actually that part happened before the conference. So the conference itself was perhaps slightly less important, to be honest. And of course, these presentations by these 100 head of states was very moving. This was one of the few ones that sent in a video message rather than being also in Glasgow. Very dramatic picture, of course, from Tuvalu, where around 40% of their island is already affected by sea level rise. So a very serious situation. But if you listen to many of the other speeches, it was always the same storyline, actually, that they feel climate change already, and they have losses and damages already. So you you would have thought, because they flew in right at the beginning of the conference, so you would think, well, if everybody agrees, then why don't we act boldly? And of course, that was then another picture, because the prime ministers left and the negotiators stayed, and of course that means that country representatives from OPEC and others stayed as well. The way we measure progress on this self-committed targets of countries is with this kind of temperature presentation. Some of you may know that. That's as well from Climate Action Tracker. Very nice way to present it. And well, you see that we are already at 1.2 degree warming, so very little space left. You also see where realistically we end up if countries do what they do. This is the blue one, the 2.7 degree. That's actually what they are doing right now. And so we would end up by end of the century at 2.7 degree warming, devastating warming with huge impacts. If the countries would actually follow through and implement more measures to achieve the targets they promised, and you would end up at 2.4. And importantly, due to this kind of additional effort to push countries to come up with good climate plans, they did send in better plans, and this lowered these expected temperatures by about 0.3 degrees. This sounds like little, but actually each 0.1 degree makes a big difference in terms of impacts. And more to the right, you see kind of pledges, net zero targets by 2050, 2060, 2070, whatever, and where you would end up if countries would take that serious. But more likely they are not going to take it as serious as we wanted to see. And this was really a kind of a nice newspaper article about an Australian announcing that he will quit drinking by 2050. And of course, he also mentioned that he will continue to drink as normal for the foreseeable future. And only shortly before 2050, he will stop drinking. And that's probably very similar to the emissions situation. He also explained that it's just not realistic to transition to zero alcohol overnight, so that this requires really a steady and phased approach where nothing changes for at least 2 decades. That's pretty much how many country representatives would see it as well. And then he was also referring to this idea that the CO2 market will resolve issues. And he mentioned that there were days that he didn't drink actually, and that he should get credits for that as well. So this fun story is, of course, just to give you an idea kind of what are the problems, how actually countries behave, and the reason, of course, they still behave like that because they hope other countries will actually do the job of mitigate emissions and avert dangerous climate change, and so they don't have to change for a very long time to come. The real outcome of the conference is something that goes way beyond what I can explain tonight. So I really recommend those of you that are interested in some of the issues to go to this website. Carbon Brief is a really good place to get daily information. It is run partly by former WWF colleagues, and they are doing an excellent job. On the left side, you see what has been negotiated in Glasgow, and on the right side, a very impressive list of things that happened on the site, declarations, voluntary commitments by companies, cities, by countries. You have been reading some of that in the newspapers, but that's a really impressive long list, and it's a very important part of such conferences as well. They more and more get like a two-pillar thing, like the negotiations pillar and the non-negotiation pillar, and the non-negotiation pillar actually grows in importance very very much. And yeah, I'm myself, and I will later talk about my role. I was asked to do negotiations for the Glasgow Climate Pact. This first point, that's kind of the more political decision where most things get in that should get traction later on, kind of things that usually ministers are negotiating at the final wee hours to agree on. So it's slightly less technical as well. But I will give after it's a nice example of those negotiations that I was able to follow really closely. And maybe only you can see finance, loss and damage, adaptations, all the big issues were negotiated, and we made small steps in the right direction. Article 6, that's this carbon market that has been established now in Glasgow. For the last 3 conferences, it was not possible to get rules to that. Thanks to that, we have now a rule book that is complete. So if you think of the Paris Agreement as a constitution, then you can imagine that you still need laws, and the rule book, those are the laws for most other articles. We already did this negotiation in Katowice 4 years ago, and now the remaining topics, including common timeframes and transparency, have been concluded in Glasgow. Knowing that this is very hard to grasp, I'm going now to present you one example of negotiations, and you could imagine that there are 100 other examples that I could have chosen. This one actually is about coal and coal phase out, and already 1 or 2 months before the conference, China announced that they will stop Chinese overseas coal development. And as you can see, for Asia, this is a really important decision. So this means they stopped to finance coal power plants abroad. What you don't see here is, of course, the huge pipeline of coal power plants they still do domestically. So they didn't announce that they stopped that one, but at least they stopped to do it abroad, a very important step that you will just see how it turned out during the negotiations. Then there was also Modi from India. And he was early on in the negotiations already saying, well, guys, you know, I want to have $1 billion US, and that's now a German way to write. So it's actually $1 trillion. So he asked for $1 trillion US before he's going to strengthen the climate targets for India. So he was very clear that he looks into a big financial deal here, and this is not private money he asked for, but public money. So really donations, not investments, but donations that he was looking for, and that's part of the game in such negotiations to put the bar high. And as I mentioned, I was negotiating this kind of core decision, this Glasgow Climate Pact, and I was in charge for the Swiss government, and the Swiss government is in a negotiation group called Environmental Integrity Group, a really nice name, and that's together with Mexico, Korea, Georgia, Liechtenstein, and Monaco. And being such a negotiation group means that you have an extra power to be in the small rooms and to introduce text proposals that usually need to be taken into account from the presidency when you do so. So I was actually able to put in a lot of nice language that WWF and other NGOs liked, of course. So we actually put in this language so that we want to phase out harmful coal, fossil fuels, plastics, and also the fossil fuel subsidies. So this was kind of the raising the bar on our side of what we want to see from the negotiations. after a few days of consultations, the UK presidency then came up with an element paper and just saying, well, we can think about specific measures for emissions intensive sectors. This was, of course, very disappointing because it was so general and we couldn't understand what it really means. So on Sunday, between the 2 weeks of negotiations, we had the big strategy meeting of the Climate Action Network, more than 1,000 NGOs being in this organization, and we decided to actually rally for this fossil fuel phase out phrase. So we put a lot of pressure on all the different countries and negotiators over the weekend. And so it came that actually in the next iteration on November 10th, the presidency proposed then actually to phase out coal. This gave a lot of pushback by those countries that feel comfortable with still going on with some coal. And so it was changed to the phrase that the phase out of unabated coal would be a good idea rather than coal in general. And so it was restricted in 2 ways. It was just coal power now and not coal in general. And it was also unabated. That this means coal without CCS, without carbon storage, carbon capture and storage, rather than those without capturing the CO2. And we thought, okay, that's a pity, but still big progress, because so far in the climate negotiations, we didn't have anything like that. And then at the next day, this was already in the overtime. Usually the conference should have been finished on November 12th. And so this is now already on Saturday. The new text came out and added actually that there is also support needed for a just transition. Basically, this means, and you have to pay for it. So India came in here, that this is an important part, of course, to get finance as well. And we thought, well, okay, that's fair enough that some financial flows should go into that support as well. But then at the very final hour, the UK presidency, or rumors went around that actually India and China are still not happy with that formulation, that they want to replace the word phase out by phase down, as you probably read in some papers. And so we have had a huddle. Here you see kind of the remaining people from the Swiss delegation, and to the right you see Bundesrat Simonetta Sommaruga. She was there as well. She's very keen to actually follow through the whole remaining days at the conference. This was really great. And so we discussed whether the Switzerland, together with the Environmental Integrity Group, should agree on that proposal or not. If we wouldn't have agreed, we would have blocked the whole negotiations. And you can easily imagine, it was already Saturday evening, that this would have meant that probably the negotiations would have gone on through Sunday. So it was a really tough decision, and finally we decided that we will not block that one, because the legal implications of that decision is not that big. It's more a political declaration at the end of the day. So we agreed actually to this watering down even more from a phase out to a phase down. So this is kind of just to show you how it goes from green to red. So the high level you set and what you end up as a compromise among these almost 200 parties that all have different national circumstances, different level where they are right now in their development pathway. And a little bit important, it is actually what we agree there, because the day after, the Australians were already mentioning that they are extremely happy about the outcome of Glasgow, because in Glasgow it was decided that coal for the poor is very important, and that they would be more than happy to provide a lot of coal in the future to all those countries in need of more calls. So you can see how these results are taken up then by parties and reinterpreted in a way that is not really a nice way to do it, of course. Here's some pics because it was like very special this time. I think all the different conferences I've been part of, we never had 3 Bundesräte with us. Our president, Parmala, to the left, he was there at the beginning with the 100 head of states. Then in the middle, Uli Maurer. Usually he says that he isn't interested in things at all, but this time he was interested, and he joined the other financial ministers to talk about sustainable finance, not in the conference venue itself, but just outside of Glasgow. And then to the right, you see the picture together with Simonetta Sommaruga, who actually arrived a day earlier than she planned, and she also skipped a meeting of the Bundesratssitzung. That's something you are not supposed to do. So this shows how important it was for her to be part of that, and also to lead some part of side negotiations on a ministerial level. And Switzerland is very special because they involve also a few people from the civil society. There has been a representative from the banking association, Swiss Banking Association, from the Swiss Insurance Organization, and then also from the environmental NGOs, and this was me this time. In addition, we had also a youth representative, Anais, and she did also great work on negotiations. There are small teams, so this means everybody gets to negotiate on behalf of Switzerland, following the mandate, of course, of the Bundesrat. So we were not free to really do what we wanted. Just a second, sorry. Sorry, I had to shy away my son to make sure it's quite enough here. Yeah, so that's very special. No other country, as far as I know, is doing that in this way, and it works out really well for both, for the Swiss, because they profit from all the networks we have, and of course also for us, because we get the chance to bring in some ideas that the NGOs would like to see in the negotiations. WWF was represented in a big way. We had again our own pavilion. More than 50 events took place during the 2 weeks in this pavilion. They were also streamed by YouTube and so on, with huge attendance. I think much more than 10,000 people watching those events, and this was basically on our topics: the way we work together with cities, the way we work with companies, then our nature-based solution projects, how we want to see the finance sector move, and so on. So this was really important. Also from Switzerland, WWF Switzerland, we had 2 kind of contributions. One was in the field of carbon markets, and the other one was to present the new landscape resilience fund idea, or not idea, that has been established in Switzerland, and where we have a public-private partnership actually in landscape approaches to environmental protection. So kind of bringing together our different environmental topics together with the livelihood aspects of working in one region, having a comprehensive approach. I think that's a very future-proof way to do it. So yeah, after the conference, of course, we can be very happy because we achieved much more than what we expected beforehand. We expected beforehand that the negotiations might collapse, because the way we started is that the industrialized countries did not come up with their finance commitment, so they did not pay the amount they promised 10 years ago to pay to the developing countries. So this could have also easily be a problem to sit together in the first place. So this worked out really well. It was very well handled by the UK. So as a negotiator, you could be very happy about what happened. But of course, as an expert and somebody who understands what the science is telling us, it's just dramatic to see this gap between what we're doing in this type of negotiations and what is really needed to get ahead. And I was really glad kind of to see how many other actors, non-state actors, are becoming more and more active and are pushing the envelope because what the parties, the countries are negotiating amongst each other is of course far away from what is needed. It's just the kind of the common denominator of 197 countries. So that's not a recipe to fight the climate crisis. This is short of a summary that I can give to the climate conference, and so this is the moment to take questions on that one.
So I have a couple here. One gets back to one of the very first slides you have in this section, and that all of the temperature, you don't have to, well, all the temperature projections that we see, they're calculated with certain assumptions, right? Business as usual, business if we really, take it seriously, business as if we suck CO2 out of the atmosphere. And so they have a range of temperatures that we could see at 2100 or by the year 2100. And my question is, are you aware of any calculations that go out using the same sort of assumptions to 2200?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, you can find that actually in the IPCC report. I think they now started even to do it through 2300. I think it's the first time they expanded that because they realized that this is quite some misconception.
Yeah.
And basically, what you can say is that if you are not achieving a warming below 2 degrees by 2100, this means much bigger warming later on. So only if you're getting below 2 degrees by 2100, you have a chance that 2200 will be below 2 degrees as well. This has to do, on the one hand, with the amount of carbon you have in the system, but it has also, of course, to do with the number of tipping points that you crash. So the more tipping points, so if the permafrost starts to melt and methane leaks start to get bigger, then of course, even if you're stopping some sources of CO2, this other process will go on and increase the emissions and increase the radiative forcing, and so you get into a new dynamic in a spiral that you can't stop, similar to the melting of ice sheets and so on, where the albedo effect gets bigger and bigger. So independent on the emissions that you still have, it's something that looks unstoppable, unless you believe MasterCard that you just can cover it up with some type of cover that they are happy to finance. No joke. I mean, it's those are kind of the reasons why the temperatures will rise dramatically if you are not limiting it well below 2 degrees.
Okay, thank you. There is one other one here from Alana. Are there any real consequences to nations not hitting their targets? And are the NDCs essentially the agreement distilled into SMART objectives?
That's a good question. No, legally speaking, not. Other the type of consequences that you have if you publicly, globally do not keep a promise. And this is also why WWF UK and many other offices have this campaign ongoing. We won't forget. Eventually, the first letters are WWF as well, so we won't forget, and so we won't forget the promises. So it's actually the civil society and the pressure also parties put on other parties to meet their promises. That's kind of the major mechanism on how to make sure that they are going to do that. This is also why it was so important to finally agree on the way the data needs to be reported, the level of transparency, because if you don't know the data, you even can't blame somebody for not doing what they promised. So I think we achieved that one in Glasgow, that this will be possible. But you know, at the end of the day, I mean, you're always free to leave the agreement if you can't meet your targets as well. So even if we would have very harsh and good sanctions, it's still an easy way to go out. So with Kyoto, we did have hard and good sanctions. And what did Canada do when they realized that they will not meet the target? They left. So yeah, so just to kind of give you some ideas how difficult it is on a global level, on the international level, to talk about sanctions, because there is no organization that makes sure that all countries have to be part of such an agreement. Are there more questions to this conference and the special settings and so on? The promise thing is really important. I mean, what you mentioned, there is a good example. There has been a promise now that that was signed, I think, by 100 countries or so, that they will stop deforestation by 2030. And those that are a little bit longer in the circles may remember that we had the same promise for 2020. So the stop of deforestation by 2020 was already promised before and was not achieved. So it was just delayed for another 10 years. And people hope that Brazil and some others suddenly actually stop and keep their promise. So that's really the hard business of international policy. You have very few levers to sanction them.
There is another question on the chat from the first part of the presentation from Tamas Erdey. This person asked, what can we do as individuals to contribute to the One Planet City Challenge?
Good question. I thought what an individual can do in general to fight climate change, but in the context of this One Planet City Challenge, of course, it's a very good opportunity to look, well, what is my city I'm living in already doing? Are they part of such a network of cities that commit themselves to go further? Do they have in their constitution or legislation already a certain requirement? Some of you heard that in Winterthur this Sunday, they actually had written into the constitution that they want to have net zero by 2040. So they had the choice between net zero by 2050 or 2040, and they choose for 2040. So a very interesting development, and this was only possible because there was a group of very active citizens that pushed for that, and that's certainly something you can do in your city as well. And once you get it in the constitution, you still have to get the measures. So there are tons of possibilities to get engaged. I know from the city of Zurich that they are looking for actually more people that support them in their activities to actually also implement these measures. So I think that's a great opportunity here, that this window of opportunity started like 3 years ago when it became very popular for cities to go ahead, to not wait for the national government. And I would encourage all of us to become more active on a local level.
So we are 4 minutes before 7. Unless there is one last question, I think we can start to close the event.
So you don't want to have the national part as well?
Oh,
Well, there's
yeah.
several questions.
Oh, there's her questions. And,
Oh yeah.
Well, what can we do? I guess because we only have 3 minutes, let's move on to the national policy.
Okay.
And I don't know, maybe we can find a way to get to the answers in a different way.
I will be quick. There's right now tomorrow, on Thursday, actually, in the upper house, in the Ständerat, a vote on a like an interim solution to make sure that some of the instruments that we already have in the CO2 legislation, that they will be extended through 2024. I don't go into the details. It's basically, if it's agreed the way it stands today, it's not worth the paper what they are doing. It's not really helping climate action. It's just helping companies to get back the CO2 tax they are paying, and not much more. So that's really disappointing, but it's also not surprising after losing a public vote. So people thought that the winners should get the floor and get what they wanted in the first place. But then there are more encouraging things happening, like last Sunday, you heard that Zurich put in a strong law on buildings for the state of Zurich. We have other cantons that already had that one, and many more that should follow through. That's important because the building sector is regulated on a state level mostly, and not on a national one. So that's really important. Then there is a new legislation that will go into consultation end of year or beginning of January, and there they put in a number of elements. They thought that it's easy to get a majority for them. This means that they usually are not that impactful as we would like to see them. It's also taking over some of the legislation from the EU. It's making sure there is enough subsidy money around to help the transition. That's a good thing. On aviation, for instance, they will also follow through what the EU is proposing, so that an increasing share of kerosene needs to be sustainable aviation fuels. So there is a number of measures they are putting forward. And the timeline is kind of like that this will probably start in 25 only. So you're really slow in Switzerland in doing legislation. But then we have, of course, many other things that are happening on the legislation pathway as well. I already mentioned this short-term solution that is discussed this Thursday. Then we have a revision on the energy law that just has been finished, which makes sure that subsidies for renewable energy is going on. Then we have the state level laws I just mentioned. Then we have the Glacier Initiative, very important, that is now really heavily discussed in the commissions, and they are working on an indirect counter proposal. This is interesting because this would be directly law, not just constitution, but law. And so it would enter into force probably in 24 already. Then there is a big revision of the energy law and the electricity law, so bigger than what we just had this year. That could be also a way to make sure that the electrification of the whole Swiss economy goes on, and that this electrification is actually green. We have a new gas law that is going to be revised. We have a very good legislation that should enter into force in 2024 on the way companies have to report their emissions, and how the financial industry is considering all this in the way they finance. So it's an important legislation to redirect financial flows and to make sure they are compatible with the climate targets. Mobility pricing will be an issue. Then environmental impact assessment should include climate as well in the future. Finance, there are ideas for public referendums, also for green investments. There are ideas for public referendums by certain parties. We need a new agricultural law that was postponed now for many years. So this will come up later on, more on the state level, and as I mentioned, what the EU is doing as well. So this was a rushing through kind of the political program on a national and state level. This was very quick, sorry for that, but yeah, the time is running out.
Sorry, Patrick, that was the juiciest part. However, we're already running over the schedule. Jack, I guess we can still do one more minute if there is like a very, very important question. Well, I don't want to take over the time of people.
I guess I would suggest that people need to leave, they can. But there are a couple of these questions that are both interrelated and I think pretty relevant. And I'll tie a couple of them together. But yeah. One is, so Switzerland is small. So the question was, what can we do within Switzerland? And then there's a reference to another question about like the Friday marches for the climate strike and stuff. But what do you think? What is the strongest lever we can use, or a lever that we can use in Switzerland to affect policy? And do you really think Switzerland, because it's so small, can affect other countries?
Well, that's of course the question we ask ourselves all the time, because we have to do resource allocation. So how much are we putting into domestic work, and how much we are putting directly into international work? And Switzerland is a very special place. On the one hand, it's a really good, nice lab to get experience with some policy instruments, and there are already exports of such instruments, so other countries that are interested to see the learnings we have, and then to take over the jewels, do some cherry picking on what we did and experienced. And also the state level situation with the building law is of course excellent, because each state would have a different legislation, so you can start to compare which one works best and is well accepted. But of course, with all that, you in Switzerland, we have like emissions of almost 50 million tons only. So that's not the big thing. But if some of these instruments are taken up elsewhere, that's of course great. The caveat is Switzerland is really slow in innovating, in changing legislation, because you only change something if 51% of the population already believes that it is important. So this is not kind of the forerunner thing in general. But then, of course, we have these other levers that you are probably more interested in. I mean, in Switzerland, we headquarter tons of multinational companies. Switzerland is the 19th biggest economy worldwide. And so this also means we own tons of companies that are located elsewhere. We have supply chains that go worldwide. So the standards we set here influence actually a lot of other places companies, etc. as well. And I think that's really a big and important lever. And of course, the financial market is the most prominent and most known one, but there are many other companies, including Nestle. I mean, imagine if Nestle starts to be serious about their commitments, and they are active in more than 100 countries, and if they manage to get on the ground things really done, they are probably more effective than the local governments can be, because the governance of Nestle is probably better than ones of other governments. And so that's kind of, I think, are some of the levers that we really are able to take, even if Switzerland is so tiny. Also in terms of direct investments, I think Switzerland is number 4 or 5 worldwide. So there are only 4 other countries that do more direct investments abroad than Switzerland. And this is not in relative terms, but in absolute terms. So it's quite impressive. I mean, the global footprint of Switzerland is quite impressive in that respect, or the global handprint, I should have said. So the possibility to change the footprint.
So there's real quickly, there's a couple of opinions, but I'm actually going to go to something that's a little more concrete, and that is the failed CO2 bill. Is there a way to reintroduce a version similar to that? And I guess what would the timing be of that?
Yeah, that's actually the debate we have behind the doors right now, because after this kind of very good result this Sunday, we hope that it will become possible to reintroduce more and more of these elements. Some of them will already be in the new proposal by the Bundesrat end of this year. So some of them are already in, and so we discuss which other elements should get in. And of course, we have also new ideas how you can do things differently. You don't always need the same elements, the same instruments again. So we try to become more creative on that one, and that's really the discussion that is running right now. So we will have several meetings this year to come up with our set of proposals on how to get that in, and part of that will be in the indirect proposal for the glacier initiative, and the other part could, for instance, be put into this CO2 law that is prepared by the government right now.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I think we're gonna leave it at that, so that people can go to their dinners and personal agendas. It was super interesting, and I hope we have the opportunity in the future to have another one of these talks with you. I also want to thank the organizing group, Jack, Anna, Cara, Sophia, and Pia. Thank you very much for your support and making this possible. I want to remind you all that you can find us in social media, in Facebook, in LinkedIn, in Instagram, and also in YouTube. We will be having a recorded version of this session. Upcoming, we have on the 2nd of December, that is on Thursday this week, a webinar, well, more of a workshop on sustainable holidays. We're going to be giving you awesome, cool tips to have a sustainable party in these coming months. Also, that will be online, but live in Basel, there will be a sustainable clothing walk. There will be like a pop crawl, but for sustainable clothing. If anyone is interested, please go to Meetup and sign up. Thank you everyone for attending the webinar tonight. It was very interesting, and we hope to have you on Thursday and the coming events. Thank you, and good evening, everyone.
Thanks, Patrick.
Good evening, everybody.